Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for Powder River Basin Resource Council's webinar series, Reclaiming and Growing Wyoming's Future. My name is Alyssa Wexler. I'm the incoming executive director today for Powder River Basin Resource Council, and thank you today for joining us for this webinar. This webinar's topic is Resources and Opportunities of the New Economy. Our presenters today will explore tools available to support sustainable community development. This event is hosted by Powder River Basin Resource Council, a family agriculture and conservation organization based in Wyoming. A grassroots nonprofit founded in 1973, our members are concerned citizens committed to conservation and responsible use of our unique natural resources to sustain the livelihood of present and future generations. If you want to know more about our organization, please visit our website at powderriverbasin.org. So today we have 3 presentations that represent different perspectives for community development during times of economic transition. After the presentations, we'll take a short break before beginning the question and answer session. Questions have been submitted ahead of time, and we will also take questions during the webinar prior to the break. Please enter questions you have in the question box in the GoToWebinar panel on the side of your screen. We ask that once speakers begin, that the chat remains quiet, respectful, and only related to the content of the webinar. Due to time constraints, we may not get to all the questions, but we will make contact information available in a follow-up email tomorrow to encourage an ongoing conversation, especially if you don't get your questions answered. So our moderator today for today's topic is Wyoming Representative Chad Banks. Chad currently serves as the Rock Springs Main Street Urban Renewal Agency Manager. He previously served on the Rock Springs City Council. He has degrees in marketing from the University of Wyoming and Western Wyoming Community College. Chad was also the sponsor of proactive legislation meant to help impacted communities transition economically. So Chad, I will pass it over to you and to our panelists today. And again, thanks everyone for being here.
Good morning, and thanks for having me, Alyssa. Just as it's sort of my turn to speak, my office is located right next to the railroad. So a train just came through, so hopefully it's not too noisy and you can hear me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Wyoming's economic dependence on fossil fuels has meant that energy transitions impact our entire state. By supporting families, we can transition to a more sustainable economy. This also helps remove some of the burden from individual workers, which can lessen socioeconomic impacts in the community. Our speakers will discuss some of Wyoming's current opportunities and solutions for our communities. The goal of this webinar is to start a deeper, ongoing conversation about the needs of Wyoming's families and communities, and consider how meeting those needs could be a way to diversify our economy. Utilizing federal transition funding as seed money to grow an entrepreneurial mindset and cultivate thriving communities. Our first speaker this morning is Kelli Roemer. Kelli is a PhD candidate and researcher in the Resources and Communities Research Group at Montana State University in Bozeman. She studies policy and planning processes in rural communities affected by coal plant or mine closures. Kelli served AmeriCorps terms in Helena, Montana, and Lakeview, Oregon. She has a Master's of Science in Natural Resources from the University of Idaho and a Bachelor's of Science in Natural Resource Conservation from the University of Montana. Roemer will present insights from research on rural communities planning for the social and economic impacts of coal facility closure. Specifically, she'll focus on opportunities and challenges to local planning, key strategies to support community resilience, and lessons learned about political processes from other communities. Kelli, I will turn it over to you.
Perfect. All right. Good morning, and thank you to Chad and Michelle and the Powder River Basin Resource Council team for organizing this series and inviting me to participate alongside these excellent panelists. As Chad mentioned, my name is, let's see. My name is Kelli Roemer, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Resources and Communities Research Group. We are human geographers that study the intersection of natural resource development, community well-being, and resilience. Our research approach is really dedicated to the land grant mission of conducting research that supports community development and informs practice and decision making. I was asked to speak today because my dissertation work over the last 4 years is really focused on understanding the factors that support resilience in resource communities. And specifically, I've been focused on rural communities in the West that are navigating the social and economic impacts of coal facility closure. And while most of my work to date has really focused on the formal policies and planning processes that inform the tools and resources available to transitioning communities, from mostly viewing from the outside in from federal and state policy processes. Today, I'm going to focus on examples of activities of planning processes that are generated from within resource communities. And so today, I hope to touch on 3 points. First, I'll briefly discuss what we've learned is important to supporting communities facing closure, but also the limitations of federal and state policies to, at this point, to support those goals. And mostly I want to talk about community resilience and specifically key elements of resilience and how those are operationalized and activated in rural communities. And lastly, I want to share 2 case studies from the literature that are different but similar contexts of how communities design and implement their own planning processes to figure out what's next for their communities and their members. And so, we come here with this understanding that, or the assumption that communities need to plan. Those facing closure will face acute social and economic impacts. And the research of best practices shows that strategies need to address employment and revenue loss, ensure adequate decommissioning and environmental remediation, provide both early and long-term financial and planning support, and operate or engage a regional approach to share resources, networks, and capacity across regions like the Powder River Basin, southeastern Montana, that have small communities with long distances in between. We found a key challenge to implementing some of these best practices is that for a long time there has been an absence of both federal and state policy that outlines the terms of transition. So the timelines for closure, the requiring of impact assessments, provisioning or requiring of transition funds or plans. We've seen a few policies put forth by different states, but overall, existing transition assistance also needs to be expanded and with more flexibility of who can access it and when they qualify. That said, while this uncertainty makes it really difficult for communities to plan and prepare, we can draw useful lessons from other communities that have moved forward to address the challenges and cultivate resilience and carve out their own paths forward. And so, this idea of this concept of community resilience comes up a lot. It's used in all sorts of contexts, often describes the ability to bounce back or recover from a shock or rupture. In our work, community resilience describes how residents of a place organize and exercise agency in response to shocks. And shocks can be fast or slow, a natural disaster or change in policy or the loss of a major industry. And our framework that we use to think about community resilience uses 5 key elements, which is outlook, your willingness to embrace change and a proactive attitude, ability to move forward, sense of place, strong relationship and connection to where you live, the people, the individual leaders and citizens that are essential to the functioning of our rural communities, networks, the people and organizations that connect people, resources within and outside the community. These are essential for fostering the exchange of ideas and resources, and lets you know that you're not alone in navigating this change. And then finally, process. When planning and self-organizing is a habit or a well-exercised muscle, things tend to run more smoothly in a crisis. These elements, when we tie them to material, practical things in rural communities, they are seen in our local institutions, our community processes, and our public services. So these factors form the basic structure of our communities. The formal institutions, our schools, our clinics, our arts and museums, and our informal institutions, our rules and norms, events, traditions. All of these are essential for coping, and flexible institutions allow individuals and organizations to turn challenges into learning opportunities. And so today I want to focus on two examples of community-led processes that both draw on and build up elements of resilience in response to shock, from two resource communities, one in Eastern Montana and one in British Columbia. Folks on this web series might be familiar with this case study from Judy LePen from Richland County Health Department, as well as work from MSU Extension, Tara Mestel, and MSU researchers Julia Haggerty and Kristen Smith. This case study focuses on Richland County when in 2005 in Eastern Montana, they were experiencing rapid development of oil and gas resources. And with this boom came a population surge that overwhelmed local schools, hospitals, cultural services, and infrastructure. And to address these challenges, a group of 15 community leaders gathered and formed Communities in Action. This represented community groups, service providers, and organizations. And they began meeting in living rooms, churches, courthouse basements. And their goal was to coordinate local responses about concerns to the quality of life in the county related to, rapid increase in oil and gas activity. And they coordinated with the local health department to implement both the needs assessment, impact assessment, and a strategic planning process. And through this planning process, Communities in Action performed three critical resilience functions. First, they shared information to identify the impacts and share strategies. They networked to ensure that community groups were represented, and they increased their efficiency, minimize redundancy as they worked together to prioritize and coordinate impact responses. One great example of one action item is the Richland County's Library Safe Sitter program. One of the challenges, with an influx of population was inadequate childcare facilities. So they identified that need, and they worked with the local library to put on trainings for folks to become safe babysitters. So these local institutions are the frontline response in rural communities when they're dealing with shock or change. And so through these processes, and this one in Richland County, community members themselves built capacity by increasing their knowledge in policies and regulations, building connections within and outside of the community. And they also created this model for moving forward that they could turn to, in the future. And some findings from this study show that, participants say that they wish they'd started sooner. They felt limited by time and resources and their ability to address the scale of the challenge. What felt limited, but without their energy and their commitment, they might be far worse off after boom periods. So we'll turn to Powell River in British Columbia. This case study comes from a long-term research project in Powell River led by an economic geographer and community member, Janet Newberry, along with economic geographer, Catherine Gibson. Powell River was a timber community since 1909, but experienced significant downsizing since the 1990s. And this downsizing really shook the foundations of the Powell River community and raised that daunting question of what is next for this community. And so to address this important question, community members and researchers engaged in both a series of community conversations and workshops and ultimately a conference to identify the goals and strategies to strengthen that social and economic vitality. And they paid specific attention to what would move them in the direction of improved well-being for individuals and families in their community. And they used a diverse economies approach to guide these conversations. That's what's pictured here on the right of my screen, which is this iceberg. We tend to think of and measure the economy only in terms of those things that are monetized. But there are many different ways we interact with our neighbors and our other community members to support livelihoods and well-being. And they conducted a mapping exercise that focused on understanding all the different parts of the iceberg or the diverse economy of Powell River. And from these discussions and mapping activities, Powell River community emerged with a new set of understanding of the range of activities that contribute to the well-being of their community. Some highlights include recognition of the impact of volunteer services in the community, the thrift shops, sports teams, food banks, festivals, things that directly provide support to individuals, as well as an understanding of the potential of the burgeoning community arts and culture sector, which was composed of many small businesses and networks and organizations ripe for investment. And some of the key resilience functions in this case study show that demonstrate a truly a place-based approach that is driven by members who want to see Powell River thrive. They gave specific attention to that challenge of the loss of identity. Timber is something people loved and grew up doing. And through these conversations, one quote from the paper says, "I used to believe that the closure of the mill would spell the end of the town, but I don't believe that anymore. I have enough evidence in front of my eyes to see that the town will keep going and even growing without the mill." And importantly, the process shine a light on different opportunities for strategic investment and activities and institutions that directly support individuals and families during times of transition. So, if the funding for the library was tied to tax revenue loss, a group formed a Friends of the Library organization to find ways to plug some holes or support that institution through this disruptive time. And so I'll end here. I'm looking forward to folks' discussions and with 2 points. And while we continue to advocate for the support needed at the federal and state levels, communities are already engaging in creative and innovative processes to stabilize and support the well-being and open up to multiple paths forward. And the key will be to invest and engage and build the elements of resilience through our local institutions, our public services, and local planning processes. Here is, not for reading, but a set of resources on the case studies for more information that I'm happy to share later. And with that, I will conclude.
Kelli, thank you very much. And just a reminder, if folks jumped on a little late, that you can put questions in the chat and we will address those following everybody's presentation or have discussion. But in the meantime, we will move on to our second speaker, Jay Stender. Jay graduated with a master's degree from the University of Wyoming in 1979. Since then, he has accumulated 4 decades of business experience spanning a variety of technology and service-oriented sectors. Most recently, he served as the CEO of Forward Sheridan from 2009 to 2020. It's a privately funded economic development entity. Currently, he's principal at the Wyoming Ranch, a Sheridan-based hub for organizations working within the community and related industries across Wyoming. There, Jay seeks to identify and pursue new opportunities for Wyoming businesses, partners, and explores forward-thinking diversification options for communities. Jay's experiences in his coal community have shown that diversification of economic sectors enables vitality and sustainability. I will turn it over to Jay to lead us on the next discussion.
Can you hear me? Check, check, check. Okay, thank you very much, Chad, and thank you very much to the Powder River Basin for inviting me to participate. On the previous seminars I've listened to have been very informative. Kelly's was good, and I'm sure that the one following from the Business Council will be very informative. I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to go through real quick. I'll put that up. Should just come right up. And I'm going to just speak to this real quickly. 3 things that I'd like to cover as I go down through this is, number one, indicate a certain legacy that we have relative to the extractive industry. The second thing is when she said some of these things are severe and acute, our community began to think about transitioning early in my career, 2011 and 12. We engaged with Forward Casper, Advanced Casper, the folks in Powell and Cody, and other places to start thinking about this. So let me go through this relatively quickly. First of all, for the folks within Wyoming, they know this map. You'll see that the coal industry follows the Tier 1 railroads going north and south, the Burlington Northern from Gillette down, and then of course the Union Pacific going across the south. The reason that I put those up there, the Tier 1 railroad and its transportation for supply chain is a pretty distinct advantage. This is a quick one here. One of the things in one of my presentations, there's this perception that the coal industry all started in the 1970s after the embargo and the development of the Clean Air Act. Sheridan's quite a bit different. We had coal going in the 1890s with mule-pulled wagons. Currently today, we have 2 surface mines located just north of us, Spring Creek and Decker. We have 2 permitted properties that haven't broken ground. We have 1 in bankruptcy and 1 in a RIF, and we have about 135 folks that had been laid off. The reason that I'm saying that is as you'll see in some of the statistics later, the impact within the basin, in other words, from Gillette down to Douglas, was far more severe, and we were buffered from it for a while, but we are no longer buffered from it. It is in our backyard as it is throughout the state. Prbrc jobs in the state of Wyoming in 2014, there's about 5,600. 2020, there's about 4,100. Those are full-time equivalent jobs. Rob Godby reported at one time, those had a fully absorbed cost of about $125,000 per unit, per person. So that's fairly significant. The other one that came out of the Wyoming statistics was mining and oil and gas lost 5,900 jobs since the fourth quarter of 2019, and taxable revenue, which is an important issue to everyone, is down 63%. Bankruptcy and consolidation are without. Most of my work is coming from the 10 years that I spent focusing primarily Sheridan, Buffalo, a little bit in Campbell County, Gillette, and Casper. This is one thing that I'd like to convey to the audience. As Kelli was talking about, we have three things that we were dealing with economic transition. One, we have a cultural challenge. This is a legacy industry within our community. We're not talking 3 generations, we're talking 6 generations. With that is the supplier network and the main thought process toward mining coal. We also have social expectations related to coal. Even as recently as 60 days, 70 days ago, we had people that were making public comments relative to a solar project that said we're a coal town. Well, that gives you a touch of the fabric of some of the folks relative to their intimate touch in the coal industry. And to that, we did what we called intentional recruitment and growth, with the outlet being diversification of our economy. Manufacturing was one that we looked at, but we looked for manufacturing that was not necessarily directly related to coal and oil and gas, for 2 reasons. As a small town, adding new competitors sometimes is not welcome if you are in the economic development framework. And secondly, it's not accomplishing the goal of diversification. We also had a real effort on professional and knowledge-based businesses. Of course, that's a function of broadband and a function of air service. Again, and you'll see it in your communities in the past couple of years, is there's an exodus of folks from larger urban areas for a myriad of reasons. Sheridan, Buffalo, Casper, I know Casper is, Gillette, folks are coming there as long as they can have broadband and they can work remotely. If there was in the silver lining of the COVID infection, Zoom working or working away from your point of office provided opportunities for folks to come. Up in our community, we see that in spades. And then the other thing that goes along with professional and knowledge-based folks are the lone angels, or people who do very specific consulting services or professional services that are not tied to any physical location. And they are looking for some of the amenities in the community that we have in Wyoming in spades. You know, we have good, solid communities, solid fabric of community care. Typically, we have good hospitals, we have good schools, and I can speak clearly from my own experience. If you are in an urban area, sometimes your school choices, even at the elementary level, go from charter schools to public schools to private schools. And we have example after example of folks who have come up here principally from, Oklahoma, Texas, and Colorado, that are coming up here because they can go to public schools comfortably, which is an incredible benefit. This is one that I'd like to indicate, because Kelli touched on it a little bit, is a catalyst that pushes change. At Forward Sheridan, I was extremely lucky to tie up with Casper and the folks over in Cody and Powell. But more importantly, my board was composed of business folks, and they could see what was happening. As recently as 2014, you began to see uncertainty that's associated with coal and how it's impacting us. Our immediate impact, of course, was on rail, because the choo-choo trains that come from Gillette went through. We began to see that, and the industry sector was changing. Now that's come closer to home now, with Decker filing bankruptcy and Spring Creek in sort of a slower note. One of the interesting thing was the professional or technical folks that come up, and we wouldn't have known about that if we hadn't had the benefit of a business council study that showed, particularly, that Sheridan had a large influx, maybe 150-mile radius of people coming to our community for professional services. And when I say professional services, that's not just medical, that's legal, that's leasing, that's engineering, a variety of things. And that really has taken off in the last 3 or 4 years, of folks coming and setting up sort of a variety of shops. As recently as about 8 months ago, we had mineral leasing company came that's got 14, 15 people working at it. Those are success stories for us. Our community, we don't have the capacity to handle someone that comes in and says, oh, we have 150 jobs. That creates a tension for us, in my opinion. And then manufacturing, which I'm going to touch on as one of the key points that I'd like to relay, has really changed since 2010 or 11. We're up to almost 900 folks, and we have a couple of companies that really are leading that charge, if you will. But think again, Kelli showed some pictures of the folks up in Richland County where the Bakken was developing. The coal industry was going full blast at 2012 and 13. Well, folks that are skilled machinists, welding, engineers, they no longer wanted to kind of work in that environment. They also saw the Bakken was changing. And so their critical mass within Sheridan gave us an opportunity of workforce that enabled some of these things to occur. The transition summary, this is one thing I'd like to talk on. Existing manufacturing and professional services began in 2010 and 2012. And this is a key item. I would talk to our manufacturers in our community and in Gillette and Casper, and they were booming at that time. They had plenty of capital, but they also had people working for them of all different varieties that they didn't want to lose when the bust came. They had people that they had families, and they had people that they cared about, and they spoke to us specifically and saying, right now, as many of you may know, when you're in the extractive industry, you're making money, you're going hand over fist. But they wanted to use some of that resources to begin to look at other things that may provide them a longer term or a different market to look at. We didn't think of that on our own. We were told by the industry. That was a remarkable gem. We were extremely fortunate to have that input. The recruitment of manufacturers that provided suitable replacement of income and work for displaced miners in oil and gas. I think that in some of the presentations that I've been involved with, more importantly, not that I've authored, but that I've listened to, I think it's really key to understand if you're in Converse County or Rock Springs, Sweetwater County or Evanston, those folks who are working in the mine and the extractive industries are there. They love where they live. They have a demonstrated ability to work and work safely. They're an incredible resource, but they don't want to go out and make $8 an hour or $9 an hour. They want to have an equitable challenge ahead of them. And I think that's my petition to the state of Wyoming as we began to move through this transition of workplace, is our workforce that we have that's out there, some of them are laid off, are really an asset when you compare to perhaps other urban areas relatively close that don't have people that want to do those type of work. Our folks do. Here's two other things that I'd like to cover. In Sheridan specifically, you have state-supported recruitment via loans and grants. That's what they call incentive recruitment. That worked beneficially for us in Sheridan. I think it's worked beneficially in other places within the state. What that does is either the community or the state offers a relaxation of taxation, or sometimes out and out grants or low interest loans to entice companies to relocate and go. My argument that I would bring forward to you is that is only part of the enticement. We are fortunate, at least during my tenure, that the state had the resources to do that. That is the norm in many of our neighboring states. For us to say that that's not an effective use of money, I think is a bit myopic and short-sighted. For us, it worked here relative to loans as well as grants. It doesn't work for everybody. We went the other route on a couple of companies coming up here. They came up here for a couple of reasons. They came up to relieve what they felt was excessive corporate tax structure from the communities they were in. They came up here because they wanted what they saw in a work ethic, and they came here because the principal owners were looking for, the sort of the Wyoming fabric that we all know and love. Those are rare. They do have issues, at least up here, with supply chain. We have issues with some of the other stuff that we have to think about. But wherever you are within the state of Wyoming, that is a distinct advantage that the community, like Kelli was talking about, the community leaders can come and say, this is why we live and work here. As a point of what I have done, or I shouldn't say I didn't do anything by myself. I worked with my board and business leaders. When we have folks who are interested in our community, our key selling item was having them talk to other business people about workforce, physical plant. Can I make money here? Can I ship money out? What's the attitude? And then the final one that I would like to come back to, and I think Kelli touched on it a little bit, is our community leadership all the way through 2009 and 10 when I first was engaged, pretty much all the way through, was open and encouraging. In other words, when the businesses allowed us to interact with the elected officials, the elected officials were warm, were engaging, and for the most part, interested in what was going on. I mean, I'd spent over my time probably 8 or 10 different businesses that came here from a variety of sectors. And we would pick and choose which county commissioner to talk to. We would, if we needed to, we would get a city councilman to speak with them. But what they were looking for, the businesses were looking for, was I going to enter into a community where there would be pushback or resentment of us coming in. And I think our byproduct when folks come in, which we still see today, is we have two things that occur on the business sectors. One is you see a slight change, and it's a positive change of wage elevation because of competition. And then there's always, when people are working for folks, there's always the thing is better around the grass. And so you have people who leave different businesses and they go to the new ones because of whatever reason. That creates a little bit of bad blood between the business owners. But that's now over a period of time, we've soothed that. And even today, it's interesting, I found out before I came here, an individual that I know of that had switched jobs a couple times kind of went back to the same company who initially had recruited him. The positive thing is that company still had an open mind to bring him back. And the second thing is he's coming in with 5 more years of experience, and so his value added is really good. I would strongly encourage, I think what Kelli's going to touch at, and I'd be not surprised if it was touched on by the following speakers, is our community leaders, and not the elected officials are not the community leaders. It's the business leaders that need to kind of say, okay, now how do we assure our sustainability and livelihood over time? The concept of a rising boat, a rising tide raises all boats, is a very key issue. And I believe, at least in the communities that I have been with and I'm working with now, that is really a good starting point to begin a conversation within your community and say, how do we reach to use our physical plant, to use our people and our resources to diversify our economy in a productive manner? I think the opportunities, this is going to be my last one here that I'll touch on. We have obviously low taxes, which has been a selling point by the state since I was in high school. One that I think that is very key is we have an available and eager workforce. People who have been working and making a good wage want to go back and work. I know that those are the people I grew up with. Those are the people I work with. We have properties that within the community that are available. If someone wants to build a physical plant right now, there's an incredible challenge with building facilities due to simply material cost. There's incentive recruitment from the state of Wyoming. We have a cost of operation from when I say nearby areas, I'm saying between the ones that we compete with, Boise, Denver, and Utah. When I say our cost of operation, our property taxes, our utilities, and our labor costs are less. And then we have a geographic landscape that in many cases comes back. It's Kelli had touched on it, the sense of place where people tie to the community and its environment. And then when they participate in the community, the net benefit of when someone comes in to visit our community shows up. And I think that is pervasive and clear and apparent across the communities that I've been through in the state of Wyoming over the last, well, 4 or 5 decades. So that concludes my talk. I think that's within the time frame. Tally sheet real quickly: 2 new manufacturers, existing specialized manufacturers, increasing workforce, 4 knowledge-based, software-based entities, and continued workforce training and recruitment. Many of the communities in the state have junior colleges. Ours happen to be very tailored toward meeting training for some of the things that we needed. So the next steps: diversification. We have to maintain air service, improve broadband. This is one that I'd like you to all think about, and I think Kelli touched on it a little bit, is build clusters of enabled social network for both skilled, blue collar, and technical firms. What we call those is the coffee clutch, because if someone comes in, they want to talk like to like, so you can take advantage of reshoring efforts. We have to diminish rural isolation. Sheridan is an island between Denver and Seattle and Minneapolis. We are isolated, and we continue to repurpose facilities and skills. Where I'm focused on is aerospace and defense. So with that, I'll conclude. I think they're going to give you my, I can go back up there. They'll provide you with my information. So I'll be ready for questions. Thank you.
Jay, thank you so much. I think one of the things you mentioned was that cultural change that it took in Sheridan from being, we're a coal town. It resonates a lot with me here in Rock Springs because that's how we were also established. But I think on the broader scale, you know, here on a state level, we're an extraction state, we're a mineral industry state. And so while we can still embrace all of those things, how do we grow and add to that? So that's great information. So appreciate it. And as a reminder, if you all have questions, please add them to the chat. We'll get to questions following all of the presenters. And we'll move into our 3rd round of speakers. Both of these speakers are from the Wyoming Business Council. The Wyoming Business Council is a state agency that plays a leading role in diversifying and growing our economy. So I'm excited to introduce you Josh and Ron. Josh Dorrell is the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council. He has private industry experience in technical sales, business innovation processes, identifying customer needs, and leveraging partnerships, along with entrepreneur startup mentoring. Josh served as Senior Vice President of Technology Services and Solutions with Laramie-based Tri-Hydro Corporation prior to joining the Business Council in February of 2020. He's also an assistant lecturer at the UW College of Business. And joining Josh is Ron Goldberg. Ron serves as a Strategic Partnerships Director for the Wyoming Business Council. His communications, team building, and project execution experience support the agency by leveraging public and private partnerships. Ron joined the Business Council in 2014 as Communications Director, then served as Business Development Director before stepping into his current role in 2019. He previously served multiple roles during a 25-year career, including 22 years at the Casper Star Tribune. Josh and Ron will address various aspects of attracting and retaining economic development to communities. Josh, Ron, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chad, and thanks, Ron. He's joining us remotely. He's on vacation this week, but we appreciate him joining in. And Chad, great speaker so far, and thanks to Michelle and Alyssa for putting this together. So far what we've heard is going to dovetail nicely into what we're also talking about. I think one of the big keys that we can take away is that it takes an integrated approach from communities, from businesses, and from individuals in order to really turn those challenges into opportunities. And I hadn't really thought about the term shock until Kelli had mentioned that, but that is definitely it. And then what Jay was talking about really fits nicely in terms of leadership at the community level. And I like that he said that it wasn't just about those folks that are elected, it's about those business leaders and community leaders as a whole, and having that that really kind of core belief that you can change into something different, and the stick-to-itness in order to make that happen. I think that's a really key piece. And when it comes to clusters, Jay is also right on the money. And it's also not just about being able to talk shop with other folks. It is also about building that ecosystem that people can move throughout employers and feel that security that they can move to a new place and into that industry and have other options within that community. So some really good points already brought out that they dovetail nicely with what we're going to talk about. As a state entity, you know, we're looking at it from a slightly, not maybe a different perspective, but maybe in a way that helps all communities across the state. And really, I want to just briefly give a very quick history of the Business Council. In 1998 was when it was developed. I think that we've heard and we talk about the idea of developing a diverse economy. But really what we want to do, it goes back to what Kelli said, which is build a resilient economy and have our communities be resilient and be able to handle the ups and downs that we will always face no matter what. Diversity helps in that way. We do that through a strategic vision, and it's really the state's economic development strategy. And I want to say that and put special note on that, because we have worked to develop the state's economic development strategy, and we're working on enacting it. It's not the Wyoming Business Council strategy, it is the state's economic development strategy. And it's going to really, I think it resonates well because it's exactly what Kelli and what Jay talked about, which is we have these core industries that are so important to us, not just from an economic standpoint, but from an identity and cultural standpoint, that they're very, very important to us. And we identify as a coal community, as a coal miner. As someone who grew up, whose dad was a coal miner for many years, we lived in Rawlins, and now the coal mines in Hannah have all closed down and are in reclamation or have been reclaimed. It's something that I identified with, and I understood the identification. And so we want to build upon that. And we look at it as really adding value to those core industries. And sometimes it is about taking that step back and saying, okay, well, maybe I'm not a coal miner, maybe I'm an energy worker, maybe I'm a great worker who can handle manufacturing now and have that culture of safety and great work ethic. But we want to take that and we want to be able to leverage that success that we've had over the years, not just in energy, but also in agriculture and tourism. And we want to take that to the next level and really look at activating those new economic sectors. And I'm really happy. I haven't met Jay in person, and I think we've had some conversations and emails, but I'm really happy that he was on this, because in a lot of ways, a community like Sheridan represents kind of the poster child for how it can happen. And I think it's Jay's work, along with the rest of the community leaders there, that worked closely with the state and closely within their community to lay out a foundation that really did add value to those and activate the new economic sectors. And so really a poster child for this strategy. I think one of the things that we've found, and that's something that's really important to us, is making sure that there's alignment around that. And we don't think of it as necessarily an or, right? You're this community or you're that community, but we believe that you can be an and. And I think, again, Sheridan shows that. And as I've traveled the state to places like Rock Springs and places like Gillette, I've seen the same thing, that there are individuals in those communities and businesses in those communities, and also leadership within those communities, that are really saying, hey, we want to honor what we are, but we want to take it to the next level. We want to build that resilience in. And I think that's one of the things that we've been working hard over the course of the last year, especially, to really just understand what the challenges are and how we can help them the most. Now I'm going to take you through a quick walk through our team, and I'm doing this for a reason, so bear with me a moment. We have 6 regional directors who are out in the state in various areas working with their communities to allow them to understand the mechanisms that we have for leadership and funding and policy, but also to be connectors to the many other agencies that make it happen. Ron's going to talk about partnerships later on. I really strongly believe that alone an agency cannot do the work that it needs to do within the state. But as we develop the network of partners, other agencies, other entities that are all around economic development, and maybe it's just because I see everything through this lens, I think we're all at some level in economic development, and it's connecting those together. That's really important, and our regional directors do that with boots on the ground. We also have a services team, and that services team is really looking at specific industries and specific ways to help their particular constituents, if you will, or their customers. Now that goes everything from the folks in agriculture, the folks on Main Street, to make sure that our main streets are vibrant and alive and really show off the magic that Wyoming towns have, to looking at us exporting and how do we work with other countries. And then, of course, connecting it all together with broadband, and then realizing that larger communities and smaller communities have different needs, and how do we connect them together? And it's through our regional directors and our services team that we're able to do a lot of that. And then finally, our investments team. Our investments team really do a lot of the work around our 2 big programs, and their loan and grant programs. The one that most communities within the state understand is the Business Ready Communities program that allows for grants and low interest loans, enable communities to build infrastructure that they can then lease to companies, that those companies can grow, expand, or transition from another state to Wyoming, and be able to do that in an easy way. Now, when we think about that, we think about what are we doing to create those new opportunities. And I want us all to think about that in terms of new opportunities. I want us to think about how do we make sure that people have opportunities within their communities, because that's what it's really about. We talk about jobs, absolutely, because jobs are important. Jobs help a family to be able to have some stability, some security, and some growth, and then that allows our community to do the same. And so we want to create those good jobs, not just any old job, but good jobs that can really help people maintain their lifestyle. We do that through 3 basic mechanisms, and we're going to talk about some specifics, but ultimately we are a group and an organization that helps communities develop by providing funding, by helping with the policy or regulatory environment to make it easy for businesses to grow, for communities to be able to attract or have their businesses expand. And then we also do that through leadership and communications. And if you think about the 3 different groups that I just talked about, the investments team and funding, policy and regulatory environment, that is not just our services, but our boots on the ground with our regional directors, and of course, leadership and communication. That's something that we want to do throughout the state. I want to pause for a moment here and think about these 3 levers, because they're really important to the individuals, the businesses, and the communities that we work in. And if you think about the funding that we have had over the course of our history at the Business Council, in some years it's been quite a bit because our state's done well. In other years it's been a little tight, and so we really want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that again honors and really takes a look at those core industries, but then activates those new sectors. And so with our Business Ready Communities funding that I believe it was Jay that mentioned it earlier, through some grants and loan programs, we really want to develop those communities to be able to do it themselves and essentially provide the seed funding so that they can create an economic development engine. And many communities, Sheridan being one of them across the state, really understand how to do that. And so they've taken that funding that we've provided to the community and they've invested it and then reinvested it over and over again to create their own economic development engine. And that's something that I think is really important, because I believe it was both Kelli and Jay mentioned the idea that communities have an identity and communities need to be able to be in charge of their own future. And that is something that we want to encourage, and we can do that and we can seed it with some funding. Now, of course, the policy side of things means that we also need to create policies that allow them to do that. And sometimes communities have a challenge because of their capacity and their ability to have, they might have one person who wears 5 different hats within that community, and it's really, really tough. So if there are ways that we can provide that extra, maybe there's some extra funding that we can give them, or maybe there are some policies that make it easier for them to get other funding and provide that leadership and communication. We want to be able to do that for communities large and small. And one of the things that we've also been working on is when we think about problem solving tools, we think about the federal funding that has come to us and how it is helping us. In last year, that was mostly in the form of relief. That was helping businesses make it through the year, and so that those individuals, those businesses, and those communities could stay strong in a really challenging and quite frankly, unprecedented, for at least all of us on the phone, unprecedented year. But we also know that more federal funding is coming. And so we want to utilize these same 3 levers with that funding to be able to not just help us survive a year, but really look out into the future, 10, 20 years, and say we were able to put these pieces in place that were really challenging at the time, but we stuck to it and it made a difference. Now, Jay is pretty humble about the role in Sheridan, but I really do believe the work in Sheridan and the leadership that Sheridan showed was about the consistency and the stick-to-itness. And Jay's right, it wasn't just him, it was many, many people throughout Sheridan. But you have to realize that an overnight success usually takes 10 or 15 years, maybe 20 years in the making in economic development. And that is one of the things that I really believe that we need to help with, is providing that planning, providing that stick-to-itness, and providing the leadership for communities to be able to go through the ups and downs and to work through the cultural and the identity issues, to be able to say, hey, we're a coal town, sure, but we realize if we want to stay the same, we're going to have to change. And so I think that's a really key component there. And this new federal funding may allow us to do a lot more of that. Now, as we've done this, there aren't any silver bullets. There are things that we can all do there, and as we've heard from Kelli and Jay, there are a lot of different ways you've got to peel this orange, and it's not just one thing that's going to make a difference. And so one of the things that we've been doing, especially as it relates to some of the new funding that's coming, but also just how we can help those communities the most, is that we need to understand what's happening on the ground within those communities. Over the last few weeks, we did a series of webinars and got the word out there so that we could begin to ask questions of those communities, especially around what the challenges they're seeing, what they're hearing, what's going on in their communities, and what problem they're solving. And we received over 400 responses about what was important to them and how we could help them the most. And as we looked at it, when it came to an individual said, it's really tough for me to think about a transition because I need to be able to change my skill set. Maybe I need to get some more education. Maybe I need to learn some new training. Maybe I need to do some things, but that's really a big challenge for me if I'm going to transition into a new role. Businesses said it was hard. It's hard for us to pivot. It's hard for us to take advantage of opportunities knowing that some change is coming. Jay had a really good example of a business, I think I know which one he's talking about, that was doing very, very well at the peak of oil and gas exploration and development. And they looked ahead and said, hey, we don't want to be in a boom bust cycle. How can we really transition and diversify our own business? That's a hard thing for people to do. It's really a challenge and it takes a lot of work. So how do we help with that? What policies can we create? What funding mechanisms can we create to help businesses do that? And then communities, I believe it was said here earlier, the communities really struggle with capacity. We have communities that are very, very small. We have communities that are very, very, very large. And we have a challenge with capacity building and being able to do economic development. So how can we help with that? And that's what communities said. And so as we looked at those problems and as we continue to look at those problems, our goal is to do a little bit of a test, see how it performs, learn from it, and continue to build on that and know what the problem we're solving so that we can address it with the best funding mechanisms, policy, and leadership. As we think about new opportunities, again, there is a cultural element to it, and there is a change element to it, and the idea that transitioning your local economy one company at a time it's a grind, but it's really, really important. And those new opportunities are important. And as we talked with people wanted to really kind of tell us some things that were important. And here are a few of the things that we gathered. Now, these are just a few of those things, and it's up to us to connect people with the right resources. It's up to us to come up with those resources. But ultimately, we know that people understand their challenges at a local level, and we as a state entity want to be able to take that information, see where there are commonalities, and develop programs that will help. And as you can see here, I hope you can see that one of the things that's common throughout Wyoming is the desire to be in Wyoming and the desire to, maybe there are changes that need to happen. Maybe there are opportunities that I need to take advantage of in my community, but I want to stay here and I want to have what Wyoming has to offer. And so being able to do that for us is a really key point. Keeping our young folks here, helping people transition from one job to another, and being able to help businesses start up to make our communities much more resilient is a very key component, and I think you can see it through some of these quotes. Now I'm going to turn it over to Ron now. I've talked plenty and talk a little bit about some of the partnerships, because as I mentioned, and Ron will tell you, the partnerships are really what's important, because as an entity of 35 folks at the Business Council, that's great, but in order to do the work across the entire state, we really rely on our partners to make that happen.
Thank you, Josh. And just to be clear, I am not in a hotel suite in Hawaii. I'm in my 20-something son's apartment. So as Josh said, Josh talked about our regional directors, our services team, our investments team. We have the Wyoming Main Street program. And that is a partner certainly that's housed under the Business Council, focusing on Main Street development, quality of life, and a lot of services provided. I know Representative Banks is certainly familiar with those programs, but there are a lot of others. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. It could go pages, but some key elements of what we match state funding with some federal funding is partners like the Wyoming Small Business Development Center Network. And some of the, as we talk about startups and entrepreneurships and new opportunities, the SBDC can really help with some small business advising. They have under that umbrella is Market Research Center, procurement, technical assistance, and a list of some of the services they provide businesses at no cost. And you can get referrals from our regionals, from our investments team, from our services team. And we do a lot of cross referral with the SBDC network. But they supply marketing, building a website, social media, taxes, and payroll and bookkeeping, human resources, cybersecurity, international trade, emergency preparedness, government contract procurement, new product and market research. So if you're looking for what is a gap in a community for a service to be provided, but also what are competitors doing? What are the opportunities? So there's a lot of help with that market research center. Protect your intellectual property and business planning assistance. Once that all comes together with the SBDC, with your completed business plan, you can work with your advisor to learn how to find and apply for the right business loan, see if you qualify for a federal Small Business Administration guaranteed loan. The Wyoming SBDC network on the federal matching side is tied to the SBA. And the SBA certainly became more aware and to people and visual last year with the PPP and EIDL loans, but they have generally had small business loans and assistance for years. You can pitch your idea to potential investors, identify grant opportunities, see if you qualify for state and/or federal programs, and take advantage of crowdfunding. They have assistance in that realm, and find ways to self-fund your business. So that's the Small Business Development Center and their groups. Some other partners of ours, you'll see their logos. There's Manufacturing Works, which is matched on the Wyoming funding side with the U.S. Department of Commerce. They provide manufacturing solutions, and also technology business incubation and startup services are supplied by Impact 307 with locations in Casper, Laramie, and Sheridan, but they will work with others and connect you with incubator services. And then you see the Wyoming Women's Business Center. They specialize in microloans, I believe up to $50,000. And it is the Wyoming Women's Business Center, but they do supply or offer services to other demographics. So it's an opportunity to check and see what may be possible with them. They also have some, I think they're really specialized and help with the arts community, arts culture. They have some retail opportunities, as does the Wyoming SBDC network. Kind of has a Wyoming products website that they've created, and they plan to expand that. And certainly there's other groups such as the State Chamber of Commerce, and then local commerce offices. Brandon Marshall, our services director, and I, and a couple of our regional directors, about a month ago, we're actually at the State Chamber Conference, the annual conference in Rock Springs. A lot of networking there, a lot of aligning with the state economic development strategic plan that Josh talked about. It's important that our partners align their strategic planning process with the state strategic plan, and we're all working together and can be that conduit and serve business needs and community needs. The Business Alliance, certainly an industry association. And you see there are a lot of on that list there, the local economic development groups, Wyoming Economic Development Association, and then the Wyoming Nonprofit Network, and certainly the county and municipal associations. So there are a lot of resources, and as Josh said, I think this past year really helped expedite the communication and networking and falling under one strategic plan to get organized, so the communities and the businesses can tell us what they need and what each of the local opportunities are. So Josh, those are some of the resources out there, and please contact me or your regional director if you need any networking assistance. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. And again, I think it's really key to realize that there is a lot of resource out there for us, but there are also, it's also important to know that we all work together, and that sometimes we have to lift it together to be able to make projects happen, to make expansions happen or recruitments happen. And one of the things that we have definitely seen, I've seen in my year and a half here, is that all of the entities are willing to work together to make it happen, because they know that at the end of the day, we're all for Wyoming. And I think you know, one thing that it's not so much that I want to leave you with this, but I want us to all be thinking about this all the time, and you know, big things and working on bold, difficult thing to do sometimes, but it's also really important for us to do, not just when times are challenging, but all of the time. Because I think if we're doing that, we tend to be thinking out there 10, 15 years, and that's really what the horizon looks like for economic development. And so doing that is important for us, because then we can work on the funding mechanisms and the policy that needs to happen in order for us to have resilient communities and to have communities that can weather the challenges that we may face. And so with that, I'm really excited about the questions that will come up, and really excited to share the panel with Chad and Kelly and Jay. Thank you very much.
Great. So thank you all for so much information. And Ron, I think that when you just that last portion of those partners, there's so many resources for all of us in the state that I think it's good to share those again. Just a quick reminder, we'll take a 5-minute break. We do have some questions, but if you all that are listening have questions as well, be sure to put them in the chat. All right, let's go ahead and get restarted if everybody is ready. We have a number of questions so far, and I'm sure more will come in. I'm going to start with one of the tough questions, and whoever feels like you want to handle it, just go ahead and speak up. The first question: one of Wyoming's strengths is the high quality of public services, especially schools, that are provided, but those services come at a very high cost per capita. As the state transitions away from reliance on mineral revenues, how do communities ensure that the quality of public services is maintained while maintaining a competitive tax structure for residents and businesses? And I didn't have the names of those who submitted the question, so I apologize, but who wants to try and tackle that one?
Well, golly, Chad, I actually think it should be you that should address that one. No, that's a good question. I guess from our perspective at the Business Council, you know, we're trying to address it by creating that resilience. I think there are some challenges that we have. There are definitely challenges that we have from a revenue structure and how much we spend and can spend on services. Those are important, and we can't deny them. When I hear in recruiting, when a company says, "What are the schools like? What are the amenities in the town? How are things? You know, what are my taxes?" They always smile, and then they say, "Well, what about the services that we get?" They always smile again, and at some point something has to give. What I've kind of come to in my year and a half is that the best thing that the Business Council can do is continue to help businesses expand and to help recruit businesses and help businesses transition as best we can. The other side of the coin, the revenue piece, it's a little bit outside of my boat, but I do know that it's a challenge, and it's one that we'll have to face together as a state. And I think working closely together is the way we're going to do it. It's not the best answer, but I think from where I sit in what influence I have, it's not much on that front.
Does anyone else want to add anything to that? I'll put on my legislative hat for just a second, and just, you know, that is one of the challenges obviously that we face at the state legislature each year, is looking at the tax structure, and we've been so blessed by the revenues from the extractive industry for generations and decades, and as that industry wanes, how do we address that? So that is something that the state legislature is looking at all the time. This coming session will be a budget session, so I'm sure we'll look at that more, but that is an ongoing challenge, I guess, for all of us at the state legislative level. Let's see. Jay, this one maybe is for you, or maybe everybody that wants to pitch in, but Jay talked about the importance of having a robust ecosystem of professionals in certain industries that businesses can draw from. But this requires a certain population size and set of services, which Sheridan can provide, but other smaller communities may not be able to. Are there communities that are too small to transition? How do transition approaches need to be adjusted for smaller, less diversified communities The example they used was Timmer, but obviously there's lots of those kind of communities that are much smaller in our community. In fact, we probably have many more smaller communities than we do the larger ones. So any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'll touch that. Having a cluster of professionals, we struggle with a critical mass, what I would say a critical mass in Sheridan. I mean, we have a pretty good bunch, but going to other communities, they may have one or two folks. There's, folks that I know in Thermop and Worland, and they get a little lonesome. They're trying to figure out what to do. Two opportunities are there. Number one is the community group can go out and actually reach out to them. The second thing that I would suggest is the possibility, the Business Council has got their fingers across, is help them to convene it. Now, there's two levels of convening. Number one, getting them together for the first time. We've had some successes on that in different places. That's the introduction. The blood and guts of that is having people get together that have similar interests, that don't want to kind of say, well, my deal is better than yours. And that is an interpersonal challenge. And what we use here we have a couple, 2 or 3 people who we feel are, and I don't want to misuse the term influencers, but have both good technical skills and good people skills. And it's on their shoulders. Because their benefit come back. Now, I've got a couple that are classic failures, extremely skilled. They don't have much in terms of being able to talk to folks. But if we can get them in the right environment, they can bring years of experience to some of these folks so quickly, and they can mentor them. But to answer your question, yes, critical mass or enough people is a challenge.
I have a question. This seems like a good opportunity to maybe expand the boundaries of the ecosystem. And I wonder, Josh, Jay, and Ron, are there folks or organizations that are creating those networks across the region to do skill building or networking, things like that?
Yeah, Chad, Kelly, good question. I think Josh and Jay and Kelly have kind of set the table with this convening and locally driven. But when you look at the different sizes, it's all scalable. But take a smaller 10,000 under town or whatever. There's opportunities for and we're asking these questions and we're listening. Secession planning. If there's a small town with a couple of key businesses that are key employers and the owner wants to retire, how do we make sure that business continues? And so succession planning is critical. There could be regional collaboration, and there could be supply chain opportunities. We're working on trying to connect manufacturers and awareness across the state of each other. And so maybe a small town with a machine shop under 10,000 population can supply a larger manufacturer in Wyoming. So again, I think at the core of this discussion is this networking, listening, what are the needs, what are the opportunities, and how do we react and make sure we're aligning our partners and businesses with the resources that will help with that.
Yeah, that's well said. And Kelly, good question, because I think we tend to define community as a municipality, right? And what I think is there's a community of manufacturers throughout the state. There are communities of software developers throughout the state, and having that loose network is really important. And maybe it's even a tighter network. I mean, I would guess that all of us on the phone from Wyoming know one other person that connects us, and it's not 6 degrees, it's 1 degree of separation. And so I think we need to use that small size to our advantage more in the networking piece. I think that's really important. But it's kind of fun that you're from Montana, or at least connected to Montana, because I also think that Wyoming, and this can be a little bit of a challenge to say it, but I do think that we need to expand our thinking a little bit and think less about the box that is Wyoming and think more about the regions around some of the areas, because we can develop relationships and benefit from our neighboring states for sure, and think more regionally and grow that way, right? We don't have to think just growth inside that box. It can be a regional growth and benefit from that regional growth and the connections therein. I think that the Front Range of Colorado, I'm from Laramie, and so I understand the growth that has occurred there as I have traveled since college to Fort Collins and further south. You know, it's changed. The landscape has changed quite a bit in the many years since I was in college, and I think that we can see that growth happening, and what we need to do is understand it and be able to really support it, because we want to be able to benefit from it. And I think that if you look at all of the corners of the state, we can do that the same way. And so community is something that we need to understand and realize that there are a lot of different communities at play.
Great point. Josh, this one's specifically for you. Can you talk more about the community investment opportunity? How was that money received, and who was in charge of deciding where that money was spent?
Yeah, so let's talk about Business Ready Communities, which is a program that we work on and administer and make sure that we're really utilizing that to enact the state's economic development strategy. So that is a program that is basically a program that the state funds infrastructure within the communities within the state that is community owned. So that means the municipality, the county, Joint Powers Board owns that piece of infrastructure. The state provides the money to build that infrastructure, to put it in place, and then that community utilizes that infrastructure and either leases it to another to a business entity, or at some point sells it to that business entity and recoups that money for economic development, a portion of which usually comes back to the state in some cases. Some cases it doesn't come back to the state, and it is utilized again and again in that community to spur economic development. In some cases, it's not just about a business that's utilizing it. Some cases it is community development, and it is used for amenities or ways to make a community more attractive to the businesses that are there and growing, or the businesses that are coming into it. And of course, to make that community a much more, a great place for people to live. And so again, our state money doesn't go directly to a business. It goes to a local community, which then develops the infrastructure that a business entity can utilize. Again, we want to create a cycle, essentially a perpetual motion machine, if you will, of money that community can then make those investments again, utilize that investment to make more money and continue to do economic development. Many communities throughout the state have utilized that program and are quite mature now, in some cases to a spot where they don't have to use as much state money as they had to in the past. The process by which that happens is our regional directors and our investments team and our services team work together with the community to develop an application. That application goes to our committee, a committee that's made up of board members and our team members. That committee then makes a recommendation to our board of directors, which are 13 business people co-chaired by the governor in the state. The board hears all of the information about a project, makes a determination or a recommendation to the State Lands Investment Board, and then says, the Business Council Board recommends funding. Then that goes to SLIB. SLIB makes a final decision on that based on that recommendation, and then the funding begins. Is that
perfect?
That answers your question. That answers that question.
One of the things that I have heard more and more, on the news and in some of the journals I'm reading, is that a lot of folks younger than me, millennials and so forth, are picking where they want to live first, right? And they're not necessarily following the job. So they find a community they want to live in, they relocate there, and then they look for a job or they create a job or whatever the case is. Given that, how do you think investing in quality of life support can help support that community development to make, Josh, you sort of touched on that a little bit about community enhancement projects. Are we seeing more of those folks just picking Wyoming to move here? And then what can we do to help create that more, I guess, friendly environment where people want to relocate, regardless of if there's positions or not, but where they want to move their families and move their homes to?
Yeah, fantastic question, and I definitely will lean on Kelli and Jay too if they've got some data, whether it's hard data or anecdotal. We do have some data over the course of the last year that says that Wyoming was one of the places that received a lot of inbound, citizens. So more people were moving in than moving out, which on one hand is great, right? Because we do have a quality of life, we have a sense of security and safety, and also just a great culture and vibe that I think the rest of the nation sort of wants to take advantage of and utilize. But to answer the second part of that question, it's in terms of community enhancement or community development. One of the things that we look at is the evolution of a community and what that community enhancement means to it. Because in some cases, it doesn't make sense where it is in its evolution. Sometimes more business development is needed before the community enhancement is needed. And I know that those work together, and it can feel like sometimes a chicken and egg, but I think there needs to be a basic foundation. And that's one of the things that we're seeing in terms of opportunities and jobs before those can happen. We've had a number of projects in my year and a half here, some of which were community enhancements that just didn't make sense because the community wasn't at the right spot in its evolution. And then we've had others where it was a similar project in a community where it was far enough evolved with a base of their economy, and it made sense to provide those amenities. There's not a simple black and white answer for it. I think it just depends on a lot of factors, and community evolution or economic evolution is important there.
Jay, this is one of the questions that goes sort of more towards, again, what you were talking about, that came across with the importance of industry for creating cultural identity. But the question says, not all industries easily lend themselves to identities that are as strong as sort of coal or oil extraction. Saying that, quote, we're a consulting town or we're a business-to-business services town has a different ring to it than saying we're a coal town. Do you all, Jay, maybe you or any of you, see some potential growth industries in Wyoming as providing a similar sense of cultural identity to mineral industry? And I think maybe even Jay mentioned aerospace in Seattle, or I'm sorry, in Sheridan. What are your thoughts about that?
Do you want to touch that, Josh, or I'll go to that real quickly. For example, companies in Gillette and Casper said, hey, we've got these basic skills. Who else can use them? It's sort of, they hadn't even thought about it because they had a very lucrative economic model working for coal mines or oil and gas. So they had no need corporate-wise. But now they're aging out. They're looking at their sons or cousins to take over the company. And they also can read, the tea leaves and say these things are changing. So that was a blessing that occurred to us in 2012, 13. Where else can we look? Well, that opened the whole caveat. Well, we look from a perspective of what do you make and where does it fit? Now, we're not going to bring in, at least from our perspective, we're not going to bring in a new GM or a Tesla facility. That's not what we're going to deal with. But we can look at places where we can either build specific job-specific parts for things, or we can repurpose a little bit of what we do to another industry. And we've had 2 or 3 successes, and we have people still looking at it. One of the core operational differences that is factual is if you are within a pay compensation system for an oil company or a coal company, they can send you a PO and boom, you do it and go. If you happen to be working in a different industry, whether it's semiconductor construction or whether it's aerospace and defense, their decision tree on procurement is a little bit more cumbersome. That is a real cultural challenge for Wyoming companies. The, whatever you want to call it, the checks and balances is the polite way, but the bureaucracy that's associated with the procurement decision is a challenge for some people who are not patient. That's where I think Ron touched with PTAC is such an incredible, valuable resource to bring reality into that. The gestation period, although the new structure from the new administration is trying to accelerate that, they still have the burden of comprehensive due diligence if you can do the work to the level they want. The core that we have seen, which Wyoming companies flourish, is once they get in, and Montana, by the way, Kelly, some of those folks up in Bozeman, once they get in that system, their performance rests on their ability to do the job over time, and it can grow rapidly. And that's where I think sustainability and growth is a real key opportunity.
Anyone else want to add to that? Go ahead, Kelly.
I'll just add to that from the Powell River case study, and one of the benefits of that, diverse economies approach is trying to, sit down and look at what exists, what activities are going on that might be overlooked already. There is probably a lot of businesses ready for investment and innovation happening that sort of, a process that helps you read for diversity in the local economy might be a way to get to sort of that yes and approach that Josh was mentioning. Thanks.
Yeah, Kelly, that whole idea of essentially understanding your economic development assets, and I know that's like buzzword central right there, but it's really important to understand what you have and what businesses you have in your community. Sometimes we say, oh, we're a coal community, but then when you start to look around, you realize there are a lot of different pockets of folks who are doing things that you hadn't even imagined, that you didn't realize. And I also think people need to realize that it's not a light switch. It's not like, oh, we're an X community and then tomorrow we're going to be a Y community. It takes a long time. As Jay mentioned, you're not going to switch over and become GM. You're not going to have GM move in and be able to supply that. It's going to take those 20-person companies, 30-person companies, 40-person companies, and having all of them grow at a reasonable and sustainable pace. And then in 5 years, in 10 years, you're all of a sudden going, wait, what kind of community are we? Because we feel different now. And it's going to take some time. And I think that's a key component, is understanding that every company that brings in new opportunities is important, or every company that's there and can grow is important. And that changes the shape of your culture over a larger time span.
No, that's a great point. I think so often, and we hear this at the legislative level, I hear this on my job all the time, we're looking for that one big fish, right? We're looking for the Toyota plant to come in and add 5,000 jobs, which is unreasonable. But it's, it might be my neighbor who has a small business and can add one job, and then pretty soon he can add a second job, or those small little 10 employee companies. So another question, and this may be one that I can throw on my legislative hat, but I'll let you all see if you want to address it as well. How will the Biden infrastructure plans or Biden infrastructure funds be prioritized? And I'll kind of dovetail on that and ask you also, what essential infrastructure improvements do you all think the state needs?
Well, I'll jump on it really quickly from our perspective. One of the things that's really near and dear to our hearts, and it's because we did some work on it last year. We've had the position and the Broadband Advisory Council as part of the Wyoming Business Council for a while now, is broadband infrastructure. And I know that that's part of it. And I think that connection is really key to our communities. I think the ability to access the internet and be able to do business over the internet and do that is really important for our community. So that's an infrastructure area that we're looking at mapping now looking at the areas that can utilize it the most and where it can make a big difference. So obviously broadband is a big one, but I'm also really excited about, you know, thinking about water infrastructure and some of those things that, you know, you want them to, when you turn on the faucet, you want there to be water. When you flush the toilet, you want it to go somewhere else. And those are really important, not just for our individuals, but also for our businesses, because I know that in many areas of the state, getting water to an industrial site, getting the access and the infrastructure that's required for businesses to grow, super critical. So it's something that we're looking at and we're listening for. Broadband, we have our finger on the pulse really, really well. The other ones, we're relying a lot on the local economic developers to tell us and to have their cities and municipalities have it in their planning.
Anyone else have any insight into anything that you would like to see from an infrastructure standpoint? I will sort of, for a second, just put on my legislative hat and let you know that we, the legislature, had tentatively looked at having a special session in July to address some of those funds and put it together some framework for how those funds are going to be distributed, and that is not going to be happening this year. But we do have a letter from the President of the Senate, Senator Don Stender, and Representative Eric Barlow, Speaker of the House. I'll tell you the priorities or the objectives that they've laid out for what they would like to see those funds used when we do go into session. And there's I don't know, half a dozen bullet points here. They want to make sure the funds have a lasting impact or a return on investment, that they don't replenish budget cuts unless that replenishment can be sustained, that whatever the investment is can be sustained and not add to the state's ongoing financial responsibilities, that the funds support stimulus over relief, that where possible, we leverage the dollars to matching or buy-in programs, and that we create capacity for the future and benefit a wide group of citizens. So those are some of the things that the legislature has put together as far as some, I guess, guidelines as we kind of get together and decide further how those funds will be spent and will be allocated. Let's see, check questions. What do you all think? How can communities best address gaps in transition support? Any thoughts about that? What individual communities can do when maybe there isn't the support they need, or there are some gaps there?
I can start and pass it off to the team. In addition to just getting started on those planning processes and also developing, you know, getting a sense of what are our shared community goals. So when there is, you know, funding available, you are ready to put that to use. One examples that we see in resource communities that seem to be filling the gaps is the role of community foundations. So they are a way in places like many of our counties in the West, it's really hard to save resource revenues, and there are, you know, state policies that limit your ability to save that money, to flatten the spending and invest it over time. And one of the ways we've seen communities go around that is through community foundations, where they have a neutral role, they're mission driven, and they can do things like replenish municipal budgets if they need to. They can put on trainings, they can run processes. That seems like, you know, one way communities fill the gaps. And I'd love to hear from folks on the panel too, if there are other ways that you're seeing in your communities how they're capturing wealth and creating those rainy day funds to support community goals.
I may put that one to both Jay and Chad as well. I think that they're really close to their communities and understand that. Maybe there's some insight there. Sorry.
Well, from a gap standpoint, we still struggle with just the reality that for our case, our local mines who are both permitted and operating are cutting back. the reality is out there. This ancillary issues on rail workers and suppliers for electrical stuff and the medical community is becoming pervasive enough across the community that people are starting to say, hey, we need to start thinking about that. So the key is recognize that a gap is likely to come. Now, it's not certain. I mean, good God, I've been through three coal booms. It's not certain, but it's appropriate for us to maintain our community style of life to begin to look for alternatives to take care of just the people we have.
Chad, I would just add, kind of to take it to a next thought or phase, that community planning, to build resiliency, you need continuity. I mean, there are many examples in Wyoming, Montana, and other states, but with Jay on this meeting, it brings to mind what he's talked about with Sheridan, and Josh said 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that Sheridan is doing some remarkable things, but it was not an overnight success. And it took Jay's group and other groups and for that philanthropy and local leadership to stick to a 20-year vision. And to get that resiliency and then to get to thriving, you need some stick-to-itiveness, and that takes strong leadership to not change with the winds, 3 years, 5 years, 4 years, whatever. Just keep that going. So I think that's a good example of community, Jay, that really use some, like you said, some funding from the Business Council for studies, and communities can do industry studies and different things. But if you're on the same page and working together, you're going to get there. And we like to think of economic development as a marathon with sprints built into it. And that's kind of how we operate at the Business Council too. There's no silver bullets, and it doesn't happen overnight. But if you get those sprints and follow those little wins, they build up to completing a marathon. So.
Yeah, excellent point. One last question before we wrap up. How can we ensure more local homegrown solutions to community development that best fit those local needs and interests? Anybody want to tackle that? Oh, Jay, you're muted.
What was it again, Chad? What was your question again?
How can we best make sure, let me read it one more time. How can we best ensure more homegrown solutions to community development that best fit local needs and interests? Jay, you guys have done a lot of that in the Sheridan area. Do you want to tackle that one?
Well, I think, and we're not different than Casper or Rock Springs. Locally, we have people who have been here for an extended period of time, sometimes generational. And the constituency of the community goes beyond just their own holdings. It goes into what they feel about it, whether it's their philanthropy or some of the other organizations. And getting them to mobilize is, well, not mobilize in the coffee shop downtown at 7:30, which every town has, but to mobilize in a more perhaps visible way where they can begin to collect advocates with them that drive that sort of circumstance. We were in a position in the early 90s where we had communities south of town. We developed saws, and Bighorn was growing like a tiger. And people go, oh my God, Sheridan's going to be 60,000 people. Well, we're never going to, I shouldn't say never, but we are going to maintain, because we're a little bit isolated. But that doesn't mean that we can't think 5, 10 years down the line. And we've been both, I would say, actually fortunate to have some of the leadership at the elected officials that had a longer term view than many other places. And that has been critical.
Perfect. Anyone else want to tackle that? If not, I'll invite Alyssa back. Oh, go ahead, Kelly.
Okay.
I just have two thoughts. One is sort of a top-down idea and one is bottom up. And so the top down is, you know, one of the fundamental challenges that communities, coal communities face, or resource communities, is the fiscal policy limitations of being able to save some of that revenue and invest it and flatten that spending over time, giving them a chance to build that wealth, and then sort of unwind the fiscal dependence on resource development. And so that would give local governments or communities more autonomy over what those investments will be and when they can make them. And then the second one is something that I think both Josh and Jay mentioned, but how can we support who is participating in these local processes, or you know, they're creating the networks and building that. There is just a thinness in the West. A researcher out of Minnesota, an extension researcher, looked at data of population per organizational role in communities, and in rural states, North Dakota, 1 in 20 people must serve in a leadership role, and Montana, 1 in 22, with some counties needing 1 of 7 people have to take on a leadership role in order to serve on all the boards. And so people are overcommitted and are participating on their own time and dime. And so finding ways to support them, or taking consideration into the time of the meetings, compensation for travel, childcare, moving barriers to participation will be really important in getting, you know, a representation of the community participating in those.
That's a great point, Kelly. And I think coming off this last year where we've all had to become more, you know, efficient at this platform, hopefully we'll open up more of those opportunities for other people to serve that maybe can't make it to the city council meeting on a Tuesday night or whatever the case may be. So Josh, Kelly, Jay, Ron, thank you so much for your time. I will welcome back Alyssa, who I think has some closing remarks for us, and we will wrap up here.
Thanks again. My name is Alyssa Wexler. I'm the incoming executive director at Powder River Basin Resource Council. And I just wanted to say, you know, that was a really wonderful conversation. I appreciate everything that was said today. So thanks again to all our panelists for sharing and fielding questions, to Chad for being such an engaged and engaging moderator, and of course to everyone out there who attended. So our intention today was to provide the opportunity for a discussion that might generate ideas for some next steps to continue this important conversation. We're already looking forward to community-led discussions and doing a lot of listening as we continue this effort to reclaim and grow Wyoming's economic future. So all of the attendees today, you'll receive a follow-up email from us tomorrow with contact information for panelists, any handouts that we have from them, and along with a rough cut recording of the webinar today, but the whole recording will be publicly available on YouTube in about a week. So please feel free to reach out to anyone here if you have any final questions or comments. And again, thank you so much to everyone for being here today and for this fantastic conversation. We look forward to having more.